The Morrison family's living room sparkled with warm Christmas lights, the scent of gingerbread and cinnamon filling every corner. Outside, December wind rattled the frost-covered windows while laughter echoed from the dining room, where cousins and old family friends shared stories over Margaret Morrison's famous honey-glazed ham. But at the mahogany table, the same one where Eleanor Morrison had sat for 25 Christmases, there was one chair missing. "Where's Elena this year?" asked Aunt Linda, glancing around the crowded table. Margaret didn't pause while carving the turkey, her voice carrying that practiced dismissiveness Elena knew so well. "Elena's swamped with work. You know those consulting jobs. No respect for holidays." Outside the window, 32-year-old Elena Morrison stood in the bitter December cold, watching her family celebrate without her. In her gloved hand, she clutched an anonymous letter that had appeared in her mailbox 3 days ago. DNA test results for Eleanor Morrison, 99.97% certainty that Richard Morrison is not the biological father. The disinvitation had come via text last Tuesday. "We need family time with just the core family. Hope you understand. Mom." Core family. Elena almost laughed at the bitter irony. If only they knew what she'd discovered when this letter arrived with no return address, no postmark. Just the truth someone had finally decided she deserved to know. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number she'd programmed that morning. "Patricia Hayes' Law Office. This is Elena Morrison. I'm ready to move forward." The exclusion hadn't started this year. Elena could trace its blueprint back to childhood, each incident carefully constructed to maintain the family's delicate balance. Layer 1. The foundation at age 7. Sophia got piano lessons every Tuesday while Elena learned to wash dishes and fold laundry. "You're the big sister, Elena. You need to help mommy around the house." By 10, Sophia was enrolled in ballet and art classes while Elena babysat neighborhood children for spending money. Character building. Richard always said with that patronizing smile, Elena's allowance always came from Margaret's personal checking account, usually with memo lines like household expenses or domestic help. Sophia's activities were paid from the family business account with child development noted clearly. Layer 2. The expectations. The clearest memory was Elena's 16th birthday, as she blew out candles on a small store-bought cake, nothing like the elaborate custom creation Sophia received. Margaret delivered her favorite lecture with that practiced tone of maternal wisdom. "You need to understand how fortunate you are, sweetheart. So many children don't have loving families like ours. You should be grateful for what you have instead of always wanting more." Grateful. The word that followed Elena everywhere, a constant reminder that her place in this family was conditional charity rather than unconditional love. That same night, Elena needed her birth certificate for a summer job application. Side by side with Sophia's, hers looked distinctly different. Different paper stock, different doctor's signature, even different hospital letterhead. When she asked about it, Margaret waved it off with practiced casualness. "Doctor, Peterson retired years ago. They had to reprint some records. Nothing unusual about that." But Elena filed the detail away, alongside Richard's strange outburst during her high school graduation argument about college funds. Sophia was getting $50,000 for Northwestern. Elena received $15,000 for state school. "I've already sacrificed too much covering up old mistakes," he'd shouted during that fight, then immediately looked stricken. When Elena pressed him about what mistakes, he'd backtracked quickly. "I meant business decisions. The company's been struggling with some old contracts." The company that, Elena later learned, had been thriving consistently for years. Layer 3. The professional ceiling by her mid-20s. The pattern had become unmistakable and systematic. Sophia got the marketing director position at Morrison and Associates straight from community college with a C+ average. Elena, despite graduating summa cum laude with an MBA and superior work experience, was told there were no suitable openings and encouraged to find her own path in the world. When Sophia married at 24, she received a $75,000 house down payment as a wedding gift. Elena's wedding gift 3 years later was a KitchenAid mixer and a card saying, "Every penny counts when you're starting out." The inheritance plan Margaret casually mentioned over coffee made the hierarchy crystal clear. Sophia would receive 60% of Morrison and Associates and the family home. Elna would get 15% of the company and a rental property in Hartford that barely covered its own property taxes. Layer 4. The final revelation. But the detail that shattered Elena's remaining illusions came 3 months ago during a routine insurance paperwork update. Elena had volunteered to help organize family documents when she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Under the children section, Sophia was clearly listed as biological daughter. Elena was listed as legally adopted daughter, ward until age 30. Adopted, ward. Nobody had ever mentioned adoption in 32 years. Not once. That night. Elena lay awake connecting dots she'd spent a lifetime trying to ignore, the way distant relatives sometimes looked at her strangely during family stories, the way certain conversations stopped abruptly when she entered rooms, the way she'd always felt like a perpetual houseguest in her own childhood home, the way they'd made her carry their shame without ever telling her what burden she was bearing or why she deserved to carry it. They hadn't just failed to love her equally. They'd systematically erased her identity while making her feel grateful for the privilege of her own erasure. Elena hired private investigator James Walker on a Monday morning, paying cash and meeting at a Starbucks 40 minutes from home. Walker was thorough, discreet, and had contacts at the county clerk's office. The truth, when it emerged 1 week later, was more devastating than Elena had imagined. David Chen, born in Taiwan in 1955, immigrated to the United States in 1975, built a commercial real estate empire worth approximately $50 million by 1990. Margaret Morrison, then Margaret Hartfield, had met him at a Hartford charity fundraiser in February 1991. They'd conducted an 8-month affair that produced one pregnancy, Elena. When Margaret discovered she was expecting, her family's reaction had been swift and brutal. Not horror at the affair itself, but horror at David's ethnicity. This was suburban Connecticut in 1991, and the Hartfield family had social reputations to maintain at the country club. The solution they devised was coldly elegant. Margaret would marry Richard Morrison, a struggling contractor who desperately needed capital for his construction business. Richard would legally adopt Elena as his own daughter, receive a $500,000 investment from David Chen to launch Morrison Construction, and everyone would maintain their appropriate social standing. David Chen, heartbroken but wanting to ensure his biological daughter's welfare, had agreed to the arrangement. He'd made only one non-negotiable demand: $2,000 monthly in child support, transferred quietly through Richard's business accounts to ensure Elena received proper care and opportunities. For 18 years, from Elena's birth until her 18th birthday, David Chen had faithfully paid for his daughter's upbringing. Richard Morrison had deposited every single check and used that money for family vacations to Disney World, Sophia's private school tuition, and home renovations that Elena never benefited from. But Walker's most devastating discovery was yet to come. David Chen had died 5 years ago from pancreatic cancer, leaving behind a meticulously detailed will. The primary bequest, $10 million in cash, real estate, and investment portfolios to Elena Morrison, my beloved biological daughter, to be delivered when she reaches age 30 or learns of her true parentage, whichever comes first. The Morrison family had received official notification of this inheritance when David died. Richard Morrison, still listed as Elena's legal guardian due to the adoption paperwork, had claimed the entire sum and quietly transferred it to offshore investment accounts. Elena had been systematically robbed of her father, her cultural identity, and her rightful inheritance. But she'd also inherited something else from David Chen that the Morrisons couldn't steal: a brilliant strategic mind and the patience to use it effectively. "I want all of it back," Elena told attorney Patricia Hayes during their first consultation. "Every dollar, every lie, every year of stolen identity. But I want it done legally, cleanly, and publicly enough that they understand the consequences." Patricia smiled, the kind of smile that had terrified opposing counsel for 23 years. "Elena, when we're finished with this case, your family won't just apologize. They'll understand exactly what justice looks like." Elena spent 6 weeks preparing for the confrontation, timing it perfectly for Richard's 65th birthday party in early January. The Morrison family had rented the private dining room at Hartford's most exclusive country club, the same club that had probably influenced their racist decision-making 32 years earlier. About 40 people would attend: extended family, business partners, longtime friends, and local social connections. Perfect witnesses for what Elena had planned. She arrived exactly on time, carrying what appeared to be an elegantly wrapped birthday gift, but was actually a high-definition portable projector she'd purchased specifically for this moment. "Elena." Margaret's surprise was genuine, though not entirely pleasant. "I thought you said you were too busy with work to attend family events these days." "I cleared my entire schedule for Dad's milestone birthday," Elena replied with perfect composure, her voice carrying just enough warmth to avoid suspicion. "I've been working on something very special to commemorate this important day." The party proceeded normally: cocktails, dinner, the usual social conversations Elena had navigated her entire adult life while feeling like an outsider. She waited patiently until after the cake ceremony, when Richard was opening presents and everyone was relaxed, jovial, and paying attention. "Before we finish celebrating tonight," Elena announced, standing gracefully near the room's presentation area, "I'd like to share a special family history project I've been researching. I think everyone will find it absolutely fascinating." She connected her laptop to the projector with practiced efficiency, having rehearsed this moment dozens of times. The first slide appeared on the wall: the Morrison family legacy, truth, consequences, and justice. "I've been deeply researching our family genealogy recently," Ilana began in the conversational tone she'd perfected for client presentations. "And I've discovered some absolutely remarkable documents that I believe everyone should see." Margaret and Richard exchanged worried glances, but they were completely trapped by social convention. 40 people were watching expectantly, glasses of champagne still in hand. Elena clicked to the next slide: a high-resolution scan of her original birth certificate. "This is my birth certificate from Hartford Hospital, February 15th, 1992. You'll notice the father's name listed here: David Chen." The room fell into complete, suffocating silence. "Elena." Richard's voice was tight with barely controlled warning. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" "I'm sharing our family history, Dad." Elena replied with that same calm conversational tone, clicking to the next slide. "This is the business investment contract between Richard Morrison and David Chen, dated August 1991. I'd like everyone to pay special attention to Clause 7, investment of $500,000 contingent upon Morrison's legal adoption of and permanent care for Chen's biological daughter." Margaret stood abruptly, her face flushed with panic. "Elena, This is completely inappropriate. What I find inappropriate. Elena continued without missing a beat, her voice remaining perfectly calm while her words cut like surgical instruments, is that my biological father paid $2,000 every single month for 18 years to ensure I received proper care and opportunities, and that money was used to fund everything except my actual welfare. Click. The next slide showed bank statements highlighting regular transfers from Chen Holdings to Morrison Construction, with dates and amounts clearly visible. What I find inappropriate is that when David Chen died 5 years ago, leaving me $10 million in inheritance as his beloved biological daughter, certain people in this room claimed that money without bothering to inform me it existed. The gasps from the audience were clearly audible now. Aunt Linda's hand flew to her mouth in shock. The Hendersons were staring openly. Richard's golf buddies looked between Elena and Richard with obvious confusion and growing disapproval. Richard found his voice, rough and shaking with barely controlled fury. I raised you for 32 goddamn years. I gave you a home, a family, everything you needed. You were paid. Elena cut him off with icy precision, her voice still eerily calm. Quite handsomely to raise me, which explains perfectly why love in this family always felt so transactional and conditional. Click. The final slide. David Chen's will, with the relevant bequest highlighted in yellow. But here's what I find most interesting about my biological father. Elena continued, her voice carrying clearly through the silent room. David Chen was an intelligent man who understood human nature. His will includes a very specific clause. If his daughter is denied her rightful inheritance through fraud, identity theft, or deception, his estate executor is legally required to pursue criminal charges automatically. Elena let that information settle over the room like a toxic cloud. I met with his estate attorney last week. We've filed preliminary paperwork with both civil and criminal divisions. You have exactly 48 hours to begin returning what you've stolen, or this becomes a federal criminal investigation involving inheritance fraud, identity theft, and custodial abuse. Elena packed up her equipment with the same calm efficiency she'd used to set it up, while the room remained in stunned silence. I'll be staying at the Marriott downtown through the weekend if anyone wants to discuss terms for resolving this situation quietly. Thank you all for coming to Dad's birthday celebration. I hope everyone has learned something valuable about family legacy tonight. She walked out of the country club and out of her childhood role as their victim, forever. The Morrison family chose total warfare instead of quiet resolution. By Monday morning, Margaret was posting lengthy Facebook screeds about Elena's complete mental breakdown and fabricated stories designed to extort money from the family that raised her. Richard hired both a criminal defense attorney and a crisis management firm, who immediately began floating stories suggesting Elena was a disgruntled former employee, making false accusations against her generous adoptive family. Sophia posted Instagram stories with crying selfies, talking about toxic family members who invent conspiracies and spread lies for attention and money. They had catastrophically underestimated their opponent. Elena held a carefully orchestrated press conference that Wednesday morning at Patricia Hayes's downtown law office. Local media attended eagerly. Connecticut's media loved nothing more than old family money scandals involving fraud and family betrayal. Elena presented her evidence with methodical precision: DNA test results, original bank records, legal documents, and sworn testimony from David Chen's estate attorney. But the most devastating testimony came from a source no one had anticipated. "I've stayed quiet for 32 years, announced Aunt Carol, Margaret's own sister, stepping up to the microphone with a shoebox tucked under her arm. "But I cannot and will not watch this family destroy Elena any longer." Carol had been the anonymous letter sender. She had also been quietly preserving evidence for over 3 decades. Love letters between Margaret and David Chen from 1990 to 1991, documenting their relationship and Margaret's pregnancy. She had Margaret's diary from that period, with detailed entries about their parents' racist opposition to her relationship and the family's calculated plan to solve the problem through Richard Morrison. My sister loved David Chen deeply, Carol said, her voice shaking with decades of suppressed emotion. But our parents threatened complete disownment and social destruction if she didn't marry someone appropriate for our family's standing. So she sacrificed her daughter's right to know her real father, and she's been systematically punishing Elena for existing as evidence of that sacrifice ever since. The story exploded across local and regional media within hours. Daughter who carried. Their shame began trending on social media platforms. Morrison Construction lost 3 major commercial contracts within the first week as clients distanced themselves from the scandal. The Hartford Country Club quietly suspended the Morrison family's membership pending resolution of ongoing legal matters. The civil court case was swift and utterly devastating. Elena's legal team, led by Patricia Hayes, presented an airtight case documenting systematic fraud, identity theft, criminal misappropriation of inheritance funds, and decades of custodial emotional abuse. The defense's strategy of claiming Elena was mentally unstable and money-hungry collapsed completely when faced with the volume of documented evidence and corroborating testimony. Judge Margaret Thornton awarded Elena her complete $10 million inheritance, plus $2.3 million in punitive damages for emotional distress and lost opportunities, plus $847,000 in misappropriated child support payments with accumulated interest over 22 years. The total judgment, $13.147 million, with additional legal fees and court costs to be paid by the Morrison family. But Elena's most powerful moment came during her victim impact statement, when she stood at the courtroom podium with perfect composure and spoke directly to the packed gallery. Your Honor, I want to be absolutely clear about something. I'm not in this courtroom today because I was adopted. Adoption is a beautiful way to build loving families, and I would never criticize that process. I'm here because I was lied to, stolen from, and systematically emotionally abused for 32 years. I was forced to carry shame and guilt for what I was told was my family's mistake, when the truth was that I represent a love story my family was too prejudiced and cowardly to accept. She turned slightly to face Richard and Margaret Morrison in the gallery, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. I am Elena Chen Morrison, daughter of David Chen and Margaret Morrison. I am not your mistake, your burden, your charity case, or your secret. I am the product of love that was sacrificed for social acceptability, and I refuse to carry your shame for one more day of my life. 1 year later, Elena stood in the marble and glass lobby of the Chen Foundation headquarters in downtown Hartford. The building had been her first major purchase with her inheritance, not as a monument to revenge, but as a headquarters for healing and justice. The Chen Foundation provided legal aid and emotional support for children navigating complex family situations. Adoptees denied access to their biological histories, mixed-race children facing identity questions, and anyone who had been made to feel like an inconvenient truth in their own families. Elena had hired a staff of 12, including 3 attorneys, 2 private investigators, and a licensed clinical social worker who specialized in family reunification and adoption trauma. But the most meaningful change in Elena's life wasn't professional, it was personal. Elena? A warm voice called from the reception area. Dr. James Park, a trauma therapist she'd met during a Chen Foundation event, approached with 2 cups of coffee and that gentle smile that had become her favorite part of each day. Ready for lunch? James understood her story without needing explanation. As a Korean American adoptee who'd found his biological family at 35, he recognized the complex emotions of reclaimed identity. Their relationship had grown slowly, carefully, built on mutual respect and shared understanding rather than rescue fantasies or rebound emotions. In 5 minutes, Elena replied, accepting the coffee with a genuine smile. Daniel's bringing photos of Dad's childhood in Taiwan. Her cousin Daniel had become more than family. He was her bridge to an entire culture she'd been denied. Through him, she'd met aunts, uncles, and second cousins who welcomed her not as a stranger, but as David's beloved daughter finally come home. Every Sunday, Daniel taught her Mandarin phrases. Every month, they video called relatives in Taipei who shared stories about her father's youth and dreams. She had also established the David Chen Memorial Scholarship at the University of Connecticut, providing full tuition assistance for first-generation Asian American students pursuing degrees in law, business, or journalism. The first recipient had been a brilliant young woman whose family had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1980s, just like Elena's father. The Morrison family had requested a meeting approximately 6 months after the court decision was finalized. Elena had agreed, but entirely on her terms, in her own office, with Patricia Hayes present, and with clearly established boundaries and time limits. Richard Morrison had aged dramatically, looking every day of his 66 years. Margaret appeared physically smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of public disgrace and social ostracism. Sophia had divorced her husband after the scandal severely damaged his career in financial services. Apparently, being closely associated with inheritance fraud and identity theft was professionally devastating in Connecticut banking circles. "We want to apologize." Richard had begun hesitantly, his voice lacking any of its former authority. "For which specific part?" Elena had asked with perfect evenness. "The systematic lying, the financial theft, the emotional abuse, or the public character assassination when I discovered your crimes?" They had struggled to provide any coherent answer. Elena hadn't expected them to be capable of genuine accountability. The relationship now was cordial but permanently distant. Sophia had made what appeared to be genuine efforts to understand and atone. She had entered individual therapy, volunteered regularly at the Chen Foundation, and written a public letter acknowledging her complicity in Elena's mistreatment. Elena accepted these gestures professionally, but maintained firm personal boundaries. Trust, once shattered by decades of systematic betrayal, required far more than apologies and good intentions to rebuild. Margaret and Richard had moved to a retirement community in Florida 6 months ago, claiming they needed a fresh start somewhere quiet. Elena suspected they actually needed geographical distance from a community that now knew all their secrets and judged them accordingly. Today, Elena was signing the final paperwork to make her legal name change official. Not just Elena Chen, she was keeping Morrison as well. She was both daughters, David Chen's biological child and the daughter raised by the Morrison family. But she was choosing consciously and deliberately which legacy to honor and which values to carry forward. Her assistant knocked gently on the office door. "Miss Chen Morrison? There's someone here to see you. He says his name is Daniel Chen, and he believes he might be your cousin from your father's side of the family." Elena's breath caught with surprise and anticipation. David's family. People she had never known existed. Relationships stolen from her for 32 years, but now finally within reach. She walked to her office window, looking out over the Hartford skyline that her father had helped shape with his real estate developments. For 32 years, she had been taught that her value was conditional. Her place in any family was temporary charity. and her mixed-race identity was somehow shameful. Now she was building something they could never steal, diminish, or erase: a legacy of truth, a family of choice, and a future where David Chen's love lived on through his daughter's strength and success. Elena smoothed her navy blazer, decorated with small golden dragons embroidered along the lapels, found among David's personal effects and tailored perfectly to fit her, and walked confidently toward the lobby to meet her cousin. She paused at her office door to remove the thin gold chain she'd worn around her neck for 20 years, bearing a small M pendant that had once represented her grateful submission to the Morrison family hierarchy. She replaced it with the jade pendant David had left specifically for her, a dragon encircling a phoenix, the ancient symbol of rebirth through fire and transformation through adversity. For the first time in her 33 years of life, Elena Chen Morrison wasn't carrying anyone else's shame, secrets, or expectations. She was carrying their love forward into a future of her own design.